Durban isn't new to bloodshed. The city has lived through gang battles, political assassinations, and street wars that have left entire communities on edge. But even with all that history, nothing quite prepared people for the eerie, almost ghost-like terror associated with one man, Sbonelo Madanon Shangase. His name didn't just spark fear, it sparked legend. He moved in whispers, not in crowds, the kind of figure you never saw in broad daylight, only heard about in shaken conversations. Sbonelo wasn't the type to make a dramatic entrance or flaunt his power. His presence was more like a shadow, felt, not seen. And when the violence finally calmed and the dust settled, the accusations that followed painted a horrifying picture. Authorities believe he may have been responsible for taking the lives of at least 15 people, leaving behind a trail of silence, fear, and unanswered questions. For the longest time, the cops had nothing solid, just rumors floating in the streets. They were chasing ghosts and coming back with empty hands every time. Meanwhile, Sbonelo stayed low, silent, untouchable. But even the most dangerous ghosts eventually slip up. And the day Shangase made that one mistake, everything he'd built came crashing down. This is the story of how Durban's most feared hitman met his downfall, and how one of the city's darkest eras finally snapped shut. But to understand how his end came, you have to face the question that hung over detectives and terrified neighborhoods for years. How does a man become a monster? How does someone turn into a silent phantom whose only purpose is to take lives? There's no single event that explains it. The truth sits in the quiet corners of a past barely documented. There's almost nothing official about Shangase's early years. No school photos, no friends reminiscing about his jokes. It's like he just materialized out of nowhere, already shaped by the shadows and that blank space. That's what makes him even more disturbing. It's like the man just appeared one day, with no origin story, only a fate that was already waiting for him. To make sense of who he became, you have to look at the environment that raised him. In Durban's townships, places like Inanda, life isn't glossy or gentle. These are not the beachfront scenes tourists love. They're packed, restless communities, tin roofs stacked side by side, where every day feels like a fight to stay afloat. And in places like these, real power doesn't come from titles or degrees, it comes from the streets. The underworld is the escape route many see, but it comes with a price. It breaks you in fast. Start small, prove you won't fold, bury whatever conscience you had left. Soon, violence becomes the only language that makes sense. And if you want to rise in that world, it takes more than strength. You've got to switch off every feeling. No fear, no pause, no pity. Somewhere in that grind, in that unforgiving system, Shangase stopped being just another guy blending into the crowd and became something far more dangerous. He stepped into the world of violence and never looked back. That's when the name Madanon was born. People still quietly debate what the name truly means, but the message was clear. If Madanon was hired, the job was done. Fast, clean, without hesitation. The kid with no real history suddenly became Durban's most feared assassin. Sbonelo disappeared. Madanon rose, and his reign of terror was just beginning. Everything started in the winter of 2021, the first hint of the bloodshed that would follow. On August 7th, the life of Patrick Nenlan-Lagoj changed forever, along with the lives of everyone who loved him. One moment he was going about his normal routine, the familiar face of his community. The next, he was gone, taken swiftly and brutally as if time itself skipped. For his family and friends, it was a nightmare. For Madanon, it was just another assignment. He arrived, pulled the trigger, and disappeared without a trace. Less than a month later, on September 2nd, the violence escalated. Two men, Njabelo Bongani Shongwe and Zolani Goodman Buthuma, were killed together in Inanda. This attack wasn't random. It was calculated, deliberate, and cold. Taking out two people at once sent a chilling message. No one was safe, and being surrounded offered no protection. By January 20th, 2022, what had begun as targeted shootings had spiraled into something far more chaotic and terrifying. The violence was no longer controlled. It erupted into a massacre that would haunt the community forever. It happened in Amawoti, a part of Inanda already scarred by bloodshed. That day, a group of young men were gathered, unaware that their lives were about to end. A vehicle pulled up, armed attackers stepped out, ready for a single mission: killing. Witnesses later claimed Madanon was among them. The attack was sudden, no demands, no warnings, only the roar of gunfire. The shooters moved methodically, taking each person down with chilling precision as if carrying out a routine job. When it was over, 6 young men lay dead. They weren't gang leaders or criminals, just ordinary youths from the area. 2 were teenagers, students preparing for final exams, dreaming of brighter futures. All those hopes ended on the pavement that day. This wasn't just a hit, it was a message. Anyone, regardless of who they were or what they aspired to be, could be killed without reason. The community was left in shock. What once felt like targeted criminal violence now seemed like a wave of destruction hitting anyone in its way. The massacre made it clear that the brutality associated with Madanon was no longer confined to the criminal underworld. It had evolved into something more horrifying, random, merciless, and unstoppable. As Inanda struggled to process the tragedy, the violence began spilling beyond the township. It spread into Overport, a quieter and wealthier suburb where families lived behind security walls, believing the turmoil wouldn't reach them. But the violence followed, and with it came a mistake so severe that it exposed the ruthless inner workings of a hitman's world. The intended victim was businessman Zeyn Moideen. Someone wanted him eliminated, and according to reports, the contract was handed to Madanon's network. Their first attempt didn't go as planned. Instead of targeting Moideen, the shooters ended up killing his neighbor, Shahid Mudel. Shahid wasn't part of any criminal world. He had no known disputes, no enemies hunting him. He was simply unlucky, living next door to the man they wanted. And the mistake didn't stop the killers. They didn't flee or give up after hitting the wrong person. They waited patiently. A few weeks later, they returned to the same street, determined to finish the job. This time, they found their intended target. Moideen was shot along Brickfield Road. The idea that someone could lose their life simply for resembling another person or for living in the wrong house exposed something horrifying. These weren't emotional acts. They were assignments. Errors weren't grieved. They were corrected. That level of coldness where human lives were treated like tasks to complete showed just how little they valued life. By now, one thing had become obvious. Madanon was no longer just a name spoken in hushed tones. The violence linked to him had spread across neighborhoods, leaving death, fear, and shattered families behind. A man who could kill students and tear apart households had already proven that life meant nothing to him. But in May 2022, Madanon allegedly crossed an even darker line. He turned his aggression toward the very people meant to stop him, the police. This wasn't just another crime. It was a direct public challenge to the authorities. By targeting law enforcement, Madanon made the conflict personal. It was no longer simply about justice. It became a mission to bring him down. The clash unfolded in Cato Manor. A police patrol was doing its usual rounds, experienced officers behind the wheel. They noticed a suspicious car with no license plates, a major warning sign in a high-crime area. As they approached and asked the occupants to lower a window, they expected tension, maybe an argument. What they didn't expect was gunfire. The men inside the vehicle opened fire immediately. Reports claim Madanon was among them. What should have been a routine stop exploded into a wild shootout. Bullets were exchanged in both directions. 2 officers managed to escape injury, but the third was struck in the chest. The shot punctured his lung and he was rushed to intensive care, fighting to stay alive. Not long after the attack, the vehicle used by the shooters was discovered dumped in Newlands East, riddled with bullets. But this wasn't just a failed hit or a clash between criminals. It was a statement, a deliberate, violent warning aimed directly at the police. It was Madanon's way of saying he wasn't intimidated. But this time, he had crossed a line that could never be undone. Going after law enforcement changed everything. Suddenly, the mission to capture Madanon wasn't just another effort to arrest a dangerous gangster. It became personal for officers across the province. He was no longer just a whispered legend in the underworld. Overnight, he became South Africa's most wanted man, and time was running out. When a criminal targets the police, the entire system shifts into a different gear. The attempted assassination of 3 officers ignited the investigations like never before. By attacking the very symbol of authority, Madanon forced the police to respond with full strength. The hunt intensified immediately. No more waiting, no more hiding in the shadows. The pursuit became relentless. Specialized units within the South African Police Service were deployed with one clear mission: find him. Detectives reopened old files, re-examined forensic evidence, and returned to witnesses who had once been too terrified to speak. A disturbing trend began to surface. The same type of high-powered rifle kept appearing in multiple crime scenes. At first, the incidents seemed unrelated, but they weren't. The same accuracy, the same ruthless execution, every clue began to lead back to one person. As investigators closed the gap, they started to understand his patterns, how he operated, how he stayed ahead. But now, the pressure was getting to him. The confidence he once had was slipping. The streets that had protected him were no longer safe. He could feel the net tightening. He had pushed his luck too far, stayed in the game too long, and now there was nowhere left to run. What started as a slow investigation had exploded into a full-scale manhunt. For the first time, Madanon was running out of hiding places. The downfall of Sbonelo Wiseman Shangase didn't end with dramatic gunfire or a high-speed chase. Instead, it came quietly aboard a long-distance bus filled with ordinary passengers who had no idea they were sitting beside one of KwaZulu-Natal's most feared men. After years of violence and terror, his final moments of freedom were shockingly ordinary. No wild shootouts, no dramatic chase. Just steady, methodical police work that finally paid off after months of pressure and patience. By the 20th to the 22nd, Madanon could feel the trap tightening around him. He knew law enforcement was closing in and his world was shrinking fast. Desperate to avoid arrest, he decided to disappear. His plan was straightforward: leave KwaZulu-Natal behind and disappear into the vast cities of the Western Cape. Maybe he believed he could start over in the shadows, or perhaps another job was waiting for him there. Whatever his reason, he boarded an overnight bus, blending in with regular passengers, hoping no one would recognize the man carrying a violent past. But the police were already ahead of him. An informant had provided precise details about his trip. Instead of risking a messy confrontation at the bus station, officers devised a controlled operation. They allowed the bus to travel far enough before stopping it at the Marianne Hill Toll Plaza, an ideal location where the road narrowed and escape was nearly impossible. As the bus slowed near the toll booths, officers moved in quietly. No flashing lights, no yelling. The operation was flawless. Police boarded the bus, scanning tired faces one by one, and there he was, the man who had once evaded every attempt to capture him, now sitting like any other traveler staring out the window. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He didn't even speak. It was over. Outside, officers searched his bags. Inside, they found exactly what they feared: a high-powered rifle and 90 rounds of ammunition, the tools of an assassin hidden beneath a bus ticket and a calm exterior. His arrest wasn't just the end of a pursuit. It brought a sense of relief to families and communities who had lived in fear for years. Under the harsh lights of that toll plaza, the reign of Durban's most feared hitman finally came to an end. There was no dramatic final showdown. He was simply taken off a bus and placed in custody. Once the most dreaded name in Durban's criminal world, Madanon now sat in a courtroom under fluorescent lights, stripped of his influence and notoriety. The charges laid against him were more than paperwork. They were a comprehensive account of the violent legacy he was believed to have left behind. A single document exposed the full extent of his brutality. As he stood next to his alleged partner in crime, Thalente Mkhize, he listened in silence while prosecutors listed the charges against him. There were 28 in total, each one a dark stain on his name. This wasn't some petty thug being questioned. This was a man accused of unleashing a reign of terror. Among the charges were 15 counts of murder. One by one, the victims' names were spoken into the courtroom, haunting the air like voices calling for justice. Patrick Goj Njabalo Shongwe, Zolani Buthuma. Then came the names that shook the province to its core. Brendan Thandroyen, his brother Craig, and Bianca, their teenage daughter who never had the chance to grow up. An entire family erased in a single violent act. The court also heard about the killing of businessman Zeyn Moideen and the tragic death of Shahid Mudel, an innocent man who died simply because he lived next door to the wrong person. And then there was the Inanda massacre. 6 people gone within seconds, including 2 high school students whose lives were stolen before they even had a chance to begin. The list continued. The attempted murder of 3 police sergeants in Cato Manor was described in detail. an attack that turned the case into a direct challenge against the state. There were kidnapping charges, armed robbery accusations, illegal possession of firearms and ammunition. And finally, the rifle recovered during his quiet arrest on that bus, now the key piece of evidence tying everything together. The Phantom had finally been caught. His deeds were no longer whispers or rumors. They were formally recorded, named, and laid out for all to see. And now, in the emotionless structure of the courtroom, he would have to face the fallout. The arrest of Sbonelo Madanon Shangase brought an abrupt end to his brutal dominance on the streets. But justice would not arrive as fast as his violence. He came from a world where lives were taken in seconds. Now he entered a place ruled by something entirely foreign to him: time. The slow, grinding process of South Africa's legal system became its own form of punishment. The system he once ignored and challenged was now in control of his life, moving forward painfully slowly. His case was transferred to the Durban High Court. It didn't kick off with dramatic moments or heated courtroom battles. Instead, it started slowly, buried under forms, scheduling issues, and constant delays. Hearings were set, then moved, then set again. The discussion wasn't about whether the accused were guilty or innocent. It was about lawyers, availability, dates, and procedural arguments. Both Madanon and his co-accused, Thalente Mkhize, struggled to secure proper legal representation and to afford it. At one stage, Mkhize fired his lawyer right there in court, causing yet another postponement while he applied for state-funded legal assistance. Every delay pushed the limits of the families who had lost so much. They showed up to every session, sitting only a few meters from the men accused of destroying their lives, forced to watch as the case dragged on painfully slowly. The state announced that it had more than 100 witnesses ready to testify, an indication of just how massive the case was. Yet the defense refused to concede even the simplest points, meaning the prosecution would have to prove every single detail from the ground up. It was obvious the goal wasn't necessarily to win, but to prolong the process for as long as possible. While Madanon's victims were given no time and no warning, he was now fighting the clock, using every procedural tool available to delay the inevitable. But as the legal process crept forward, one major question hung in the air: who funded the contract? Madanon may have pulled the trigger, but someone else was directing the operation. Someone with resources, a reason, and the ability to stay hidden. That mystery tormented the families and whispered through the courthouse halls. For a moment, it seemed like the truth might finally surface. After the killing of businessman Zeyn Moideen, police arrested Risan Perumal, who allegedly admitted to financing the job. There were even claims of a recording where he confessed. Suddenly, there was a name and a face attached to the order, a person the families could hold responsible. But it didn't last. The National Prosecuting Authority dropped the case, saying the evidence wasn't strong enough to secure a conviction. Just like that, Perumal walked out a free man. The decision devastated the families. While the alleged gunman remained behind bars, the person believed to have orchestrated everything disappeared back into everyday life, untouched by the court's outcome. It exposed something many people overlook about organized crime. Arresting the person who pulls the trigger is relatively straightforward. Tracking down the person who ordered it, the one who stays hidden and avoids getting directly involved, is far more difficult. As 2024 rolled into 2025, the case slowed to a crawl. What started with flashing lights, headlines, and dramatic arrests slowly turned into forms, postponements, and endless waiting. The full trial still hasn't begun. Madanon world has been reduced to a cell and a courtroom seat. For the families affected, closure remains distant, always just beyond their grasp. Madanon used to deliver violence quickly and without hesitation. Now he sits helplessly through repeated delays, unable to escape, unable to fight back. The control he once held has disappeared. With every appearance in court, the legend built around him crumbles. He's no longer an untouchable figure. He's just another man trapped in a legal system he can't outrun, gradually being broken down by the justice he never allowed his victims. There hasn't been a dramatic ending. Instead, his downfall is arriving slowly and quietly, piece by piece. And for those who lost loved ones because of him, that quiet feels overwhelming. The shadow that once haunted Durban has been forced into the open, and even though the final judgment hasn't been delivered yet, One thing is clear. The hit era has ended, and one of the city's darkest stories is finally, thankfully, nearing its end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you found this story interesting, make sure to hit that like button and let YouTube know this is content worth sharing.